Okay, so I'm going to move quickly kind of through, just talk about flowers and buds and such. Okay, because it's just kind of important to notice with the grapevine. Grapevine's kind of unique in the way it flowers and its buds and stuff. So a grapevine has what's called a compound bud. So within the bud itself, you have 3 different buds. Okay, so you have this large bud here. This is called the primary bud. And you'll have about roughly like 2 clusters per shoot if this emerges, generally with Vitis vinifera. Then you have the secondary bud. So if this gets killed, the secondary bud will push out, and then you'll have maybe about 1 cluster per shoot on that one, so smaller yield. And then if both those die, then this third one will push, tertiary bud, and then it'll just be vegetative. Okay, this is kind of an insurance policy. Now, sometimes, like I said, you know, this will die and then this will push. Sometimes they all push. Okay, and that's why we shoot thin. And, you know, when I talk about vineyard operations in a subsequent lecture, I'll talk about shoot thinning, and that's what we're doing, is we're getting rid of, like, you know, the primary pushes, and it's got 2 big clusters per shoot. Looks awesome. We thin this little one off because we don't need that. It just creates more density. Okay? And then you can see this is a lateral bud here. And in this case, it's diagrammed right there. It's kind of its own little thing. These generally don't have any fruit on them. They like almost never have fruit on them, but they just emerge out of a leaf axil. And then that right there is the compound bud. Okay? And that's what's next year is gonna break, and we're gonna have fruit coming out of that. Okay? Simple. Primordia, if you read about primordia in papers and stuff as you're working on your project, primordia are just like the pre-clusters inside here. So clusters kind of form inside the bud and then emerge. Okay? Cool. So yeah, fruitful bud comes from 1-year-old wood, so it comes out as a cane, and then we either lay it down as a cane or we spur it, and then a shoot pushes out of there, and then that's where we have our fruit from. Okay? The older wood, if we have several varieties from older wood, it's not fruitful. All right, cool. So yeah, buds that are shaded tend to be not very fruitful. Also, we want buds to have adequate, you know, water and nutrients and stuff as well to promote fruitfulness. Yeah, so the buds are formed in this year. So like when a shoot comes out, the buds start to like form those primordia, those cluster primordia, roughly around flowering, just before flowering of the current year. So think about it this way. The fruit that is coming out in 2020, that came out in 2020, that we're going to harvest this year, is the primordia was formed around probably kind of June, started being formed around June-ish of 2019. Okay, so it started forming the year before, the primordia within the buds. And when those primordia are being formed, if the temperatures are kind of nice and that's 75, 85, like real nice weather, right? And the vine isn't wanting for water and nutrients, then we're going to get maximum cluster primordia formation. So that's awesome. We'll get maximum cluster numbers per shoot, cluster numbers per vine. Sweet. If it's too cool, if it's too hot, if we have any kind of stressors on the vine, then we won't achieve maximum primordia and maximum cluster numbers per vine. All right? Also, a thing to know is that those first 2 nodal positions, so a nodal position is as you're working up a shoot, okay? As you're going up a shoot, it's nodal position 1, 2, 3, 4, and etc., right? Generally on Vitis vinifera, those first 2 are kind of the least fruitful. So some varieties we can't really spur prune down to 2 bud spurs, because they won't be very fruitful, right? And that's what this is showing here. So this is Thompson seedless down here. This is Fruitfulness Index. You can think of this as like a kind of clusters per shoot, and as we work up the nodal positions. So you can see Thompson seedless is very infertile in the first kind of 3, 4 positions. Then we get to nodal position 5 through 15 here, and it's fine. It's doing great. That's why Thompson seedless gets cane pruned, which is pretty amazing because Thompson seedless is very cheap. On the market, it costs about $250 a ton-ish, you know. And cane pruning is very labor intensive, but they're cropping Thompson seedless at very high crop loads, so they can get away with it. Okay. The other thing you're seeing here is light exposure. So buds need light. Those developing little buds, let's go back. That developing little bud wants to be exposed to a whole bunch of light. If you don't expose that to light, then you're going to have infertility issues. So you can see here, this is Chardonnay, low light exposure, high light exposure. And you can see just on that nodal position 1, you kind of double this integrated fruitfulness index. Okay? So those things are important. And that's important for understanding your trellising, right? You don't want trellising that's going to cause a lot of shading of your buds, because then you can have lower yields, right? As well as a lot of other issues. Yeah. So yeah, also things like generally if shoots are growing upright, they tend to be more fruitful than if they're growing downward. So if you do a trellising system that's a vertical split canopy, the downward growing shoots, the buds on those shoots will be less fruitful than the ones that are growing upward. Also, in general, Vitis vinifera produces about 2 cluster primordia per bud, per primary bud, right? However, there are exceptions to this rule, and that's Simeon and like Gamay. They produce 3. They can be heavy croppers, 3 to 4. And then the hybrids can produce even more than that. They can be real heavy. All right. I'm going to stop this one here, and then we're going to wrap up with phenology, which I'll kind of go through pretty rapidly.